All right. Well, yeah. So hopefully everyone just got that that notification. We will be recording this webinar, and it'll be shared out via email, and we'll have it posted up on our Box Drive as well. So anybody can go back to it, or you can go ahead and share it with any colleagues who couldn't make it today. But so yeah, we're recording, and please make sure your microphones are muted. We're going to have some opportunity for questions, so everyone will be able to raise hands and ask questions at various points. But yeah, throughout the webinar, please make sure you're muted. Yeah, thanks for being here this morning. We're really excited to host this webinar. Really, the big intention here is to just do a little more of a sort of brief run through of the methods, but really with a focus on what data we have available, how to get it, how to use it, and then we're gonna run through some interesting case studies from people who've already been applying this data and this process to their work. So I'm gonna go ahead and try and share my screen, and we'll kind of jump right into it. I'll be. Here we go. All right, best I can tell, everyone's looking at the right screen. So here we go. We got. There we go. Slide. Okay, we're in business. So here's just the overall agenda. Start off, we got a little time here for introductions. I didn't actually introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Scott Ritter. I'm a research associate with the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute. Along with several other colleagues, was heavily involved in the actual modeling and engagement that went into putting this risk assessment together. And then we've got a number of speakers who I think I'll just let introduce themselves as we move through our agenda. So I'm going to start off here going into some of our methods, and then we're going to discuss data, and then you can see here we've got a whole list of some various practitioners who are going to talk about ways that this risk assessment data has already been utilized here on the Front Range. All right, so quick background. I know many of you have been involved in this process, so I don't want to spend too much time working through the details of a quantitative wildfire risk assessment, but I think it's important for us to do some of this framing. So quantitative wildfire risk assessment, or QWRA, is a process that's outlined in this Forest Service General Technical Report number 315. And so we really closely follow the process and the framework laid out in that document. Essentially, the process is collaboratively identifying highly valued resources and assets, right? So these are the things the things on landscape that we care about and that may be impacted by fire. So that's a collaborative process of identifying both what and where those HV areas are, and then characterizing how they're expected to change or be impacted by a wildfire event, and whether that impact varies depending on the fire behavior. Once we go through that collaborative process, when we jump into the modeling part, where we model fire behavior under a range of weather scenarios and modify model wildfire likelihood. And when we bring those things all together, that's how we get to risk, right? So risk is the likelihood of an event and the consequence, should that event occur. So the idea here is that this is it's a science-based framework, but through all this collaboration and discussion into expected susceptibility, it's really intended to represent your values and local understanding of resource susceptibility to wildfire. So kind of bringing together that quantitative and social process. The next slide here, we're going to go through a lot of this in our case studies. So this is sort of just a primer for more of what we're going to discuss. But I just wanted to quickly address why, why we're really interested in doing quantitative wildfire risk assessment and what role they can play. There's more applications beyond what I have on this slide. This first one here is really what I think is the key, is that they can help foster coordinated action. When everyone comes together to discuss discuss the resources and assets at risk. It can help you build a sort of common understanding of the landscape and where and how we can address those risks. We can identify our priorities together. When everyone's working from the same understanding of risk, we can do our cross-boundary planning in more strategic ways. And then there's lots of other things like CWPPs. A lot of this modeling can feed directly into helping with CWPP development. We're going to have an example discussing that a bit today. The data can feed right into grant applications, either justifying the need or why you're proposing a project in a particular location. We've seen some really cool examples. Jefferson County has been using their similar product a lot for public communication. So they've expressed, that they've gotten a lot of value out of helping explain to members of the public why they're doing a particular project in a certain location. Why they selected a management action, and they found their risk assessment to be really valuable for that communication. Identifying areas for either prescribed or managed wildfire. When you can quickly look at a map and see where your infrastructure is, see where the structures are. And even identify locations where the vegetation and the ecology can benefit from fire. Can be a useful way to either identify places that are currently ready to receive fire or places that with a little bit of additional work can very soon be ready to accept fire, which should be a big goal on our landscape is getting more beneficial fire on the ground. We can do prioritizations in a whole host of different ways. You can use the composite of all HVRAs, or we can do prioritizations based on specific values, whether that's watershed or WUI or any of the other HVRA categories that we'll hear more about. Andrew's going to be talking a little bit more about project design, how you can really apply a risk assessment even on fine scale project planning. And then finally, outcomes monitoring. The risk assessments can give you a baseline of your current conditions, and then you can do additional modeling to understand how either proposed or implemented treatments can affect outcomes in terms of risk metrics and fire behavior and a whole host of other outputs. So that's my quick list. I'm sure there's more ideas we can think of, and we're going to be digging much deeper into a few of these later on in the presentation. All right, so back to this risk assessment, kind of moving into the how. I think many people on this call were involved at various stages of the development of this risk assessment, but big focus was our stakeholder engagement. We were trying to track down exactly how many meetings, but it was a lot. We had at least a dozen, maybe as many as 20 different meetings between introducing the process, getting groups together to identify HVRAs, tracking down spatial data, having meetings with fuels and fire behavior experts to dial in our fire modeling. We had a response function workshop, which is where, and I know some of you are involved in this, where you identify how you think a particular resource responds to various flame lengths or various intensities of fire. Watershed modeling reviews. We've been presenting on this in a bunch of the NoCo Fireshed quarterly meetings to keep everyone up to date on the process. And then now as we're moving into rollout, there have been a number of smaller scale meetings using this data to identify focus areas, come together for collaborative cross-boundary treatment planning. So that's all just to say that this really is a scientific and a social process, and a lot of the value comes out of these meetings where we're coming together and just discussing what we care about and where it is and what we can do about it. So that's our social process. The next slide here, we've probably included in every QWRA presentation, but this is just the model formulation, and we can talk more about any of these boxes, but really this is just showing how we bring together those three things: the fire behavior, fire likelihood and the fire consequence to get to our final risk. So you can see, on the left here, we're bringing together fuels and weather data to predict flame lengths and crown fire activity. And then that interacts with the HVRAs and their expected response to fire to give us some idea of potential fire effects, which gives us our CNVC, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. And then CNVC then gets weighted by burn probability to get to our ENVC. This is just the general model flow. Obviously, we can go into more depth here, but just so we can kind of see how this is all coming together. And then the other thing to note is on this particular assessment, and this data is also now available, we also went through and we reran the risk model under some different fuel conditions. So we have our baseline fuels, which characterize the state of the landscape as of, I guess, last year, really, the end of last year. And then we went ahead and came up with 8 different potential treatment types. And working with fuels managers on the ARP, as well as available literature, we modified the fuelscape to represent these 8 different treatment possibilities. So hand thinning, mechanical thinning, prescribed fire, a whole range of potential treatment outcomes, or rather a whole range of potential treatments, so that we can run those treated scenarios through the model and get these same risk outputs under a treated condition. And what that allows us to do is then make some estimations of potential outcomes. So if you implemented a thinning treatment on this particular unit, now we can calculate things like the change to the risk or change to the fire behavior within that potential treatment block. And so we're going to be going through all that data output in some more detail. But yeah, for this process, we're providing all of these outputs under a range of treatment conditions. All right, and then these are kind of the 2 primary risk outputs. So NVC stands for net value change. That's just the sort of quantitative metric that tells you how you expect a particular resource to change under following a wildfire. Conditional net value change is representing the susceptibility of all HVRAs, assuming that everywhere has an equal chance of burning. So this is ignoring the probability part of risk and really just focusing on hazard. So this is a good product to just highlight where the fire sensitive HVRAs are overlapping with hazardous fuels. And it's also particularly relevant in situations where there's an active fire burning and you're concerned with the resources around it. Burn probability is no longer driven by historical trends in ignition and fire spread, and now driven by the fact that you have a fire spreading towards a resource and you have sort of a different confidence in whether or not it may burn. So it's really well applied in those sort of incident management situations. In comparison, we generally think of net value change, or sorry, expected net value change playing a bigger role in project planning. So this is when we now account for the spatially variable burn probability. So it's highlighting where those hazardous fuel conditions and sensitive HVRAs are also overlapping with higher burn probabilities. And so that makes more sense when you're planning fuel treatments, because in many cases you want to there's more value in putting a treatment somewhere that's likely to encounter fire versus somewhere that maybe has a far lower burn probability. Excuse me. So yeah, that's kind of my overview of the model and kind of how we got here. At this point, we're gonna move into going through the available data products. Allie's going to show you how we have all that data structured on our box folder. And then we also will have Jackie do a demonstration of our ArcGIS Online Map that you can use to visualize all this output data. So I think that's everything I have. We'll kick it over to Allie to talk through data.
Cool, thanks, Scott. Yeah, so a big part of this workshop is really to equip you all with the information and the data that you need to kind of move forward and run with this assessment in your own spaces. And the first part of that, or the first resource I want to share, is the technical report. So you'll see it, a screenshot of it here, but you can access that report via the link on the slide, the QR code on the slide, or I just pasted the links in the chat as well. But this technical report really provides a detailed account of our modeling framework, the data inputs, the assumptions that went into the model, as well as highlighting some summary tables, the results, and a bunch of PDF maps. You'll also see that we link the geospatial database and ArcGIS Online Map in this report and provide a brief description, but I'm going to walk you through that in a bit more detail while we are all in the same room today. And so Scott, you can go to the next slide. So this is a screenshot of what our geodatabase looks like on CFRI's box drive. This is really going to be meant for GIS users who want to download the data and work with it on your own. But if you are not a GIS user, bear with me because this file structure will be applicable in the interactive online map that is accessible to all users. So within the geodatabase, we're going to start with folders 1 and 2. These are the highly valued resource and asset data, so HVRAs. We had 29 HVRAs in this assessment. And you can see at the bottom of that folder, there's an HVRA metadata spreadsheet that will outline what every HVRA is, the original data source, a zone of influence buffer, along with the description. So check that out if you're not familiar with what each layer represents. But that first folder titled HVR shapefiles.gdb, that is a geodatabase that houses the location of all HVRAs as shapefiles, polylines, or points. Then those shapefiles get converted to a raster format that also incorporates the zone of influence. And those rasters can be found in folder 2, HVRA rasters. Moving from there, we have the fire modeling data that Scott mentioned. So within that, you'll see that's folder 3, fire modeling. There's a subfolder for burn probability. Then there's one for fire behavior where we included the flame length rasters for our 25th, 50th, 90th, and 97th fire weather scenarios. And then there's also a suppression difficulty index raster. All of that is for the baseline fire modeling that was described in the first iteration of that flowchart. Then in folders 4 and 5, we have CNVC and ENVC. As a reminder, folder 4, CNVC, does not incorporate burn probability. Folder 5, ENVC, does incorporate burn probability. I guess next slide, Scott. So if you were to click on either CNVC or ENVC, you'll see that we have summarized those data at a variety of scales. Next. So as a reminder, this assessment incorporated 29 individual highly valued resources and assets, which you can see in the bottom part of the figure. So for one example would be communications towers. That's one individual HVRA that is housed within a category titled infrastructure. Well, the 6 infrastructure HVRAs, that's communications towers, electrical, historic structures, mines, monitoring stations, and roads. Those 6 HVRA can be weighted together using HVRA relative importance scores to represent one metric of wildfire risk to all infrastructure. Then there are 6 different categories that can be weighted together using category relative importance to represent a composite wildfire risk metric that accounts for all 29 HVRAs. So if you progress, Scott, you'll see that if you click on those net value change folders, there are basically subfolders that fall in those different scales. So starting at the HVRA level, moving to the category level, and then finally at the composite level. Next. Again. So if you were to click on any given layer, so for example, that we're sticking with communications towers, in the lower right, you'll see there are up to 3 potential file types. The bottom file, communications CNVC map.tif, that is going to be just a classic PDF map. Then the communications CNVC.tif, that's just a traditional raster file. So it's going to be a black to white color ramp representing net value change to communications towers. Then the top file, communications cmvc.layerx, that's that same raster, but now it has an attached symbology that mirrors our PDF maps. So that's better for kind of plugging and playing with a pre-formatted layer. So you can go to the next slide. Now we'll pop back out to the main folder of our geodatabase and move on to folder 6. You can go next, yeah. So this folder might be new to you all, and it is what Scott just mentioned, where we reran this entire risk assessment for 8 fuels treatment scenarios. I will draw your attention and urge you all to go check out the treatment assumptions document that's at the bottom of that folder. Here we provide a little more context for this modeling framework and detail the assumptions of feasibility, cost, fuel effects, both canopy and surface fuels for all 8 treatment types. So if you plan on using that, please go check out those assumptions so you know what we are characterizing when we are stamping in these treatments. So you can see those 8 treatment types listed there. If you go next, Scott, if you were to click on any given one of those, you'll see a variety of data products that we have provided for each of those treatment scenarios as well. I'm starting with the fees_cost folder. So that will include rasters of treatment feasibility and cost. Feasibility is going to be a binary raster defining where treatment can or cannot be applied on the landscape using binary criteria. Whereas cost is going to be a continuous raster representing generally a baseline cost that then increases with things like slope, distance from a road, or distance from existing structures. Again, those assumptions are detailed in that treatment assumptions document. Then moving on, we have fire behavior. So we reran flame length and suppression difficulty index with our stamped in fuels treatments. I guess this was a good time to note that the assumed fuels mitigation treatments do not impact our estimation of burn probability, just fire behavior. And then at the top, you'll see we also have CMVC and ENVC summarized at those multiple scales for each treatment type as well. So say you are really interested in water resources, for example, and you're considering the impacts of prescribed fire on water resources, you could look at the water categories ENVC for both a prescribed fire scenario and compare that to the baseline scenario. So with that, I will pass the baton to Jackie to walk us through the ArcGIS Online Map.
Hi, I'm Jackie Ettinger. I'm the spatial analyst at CFRI. If you click on the link that Ali posted in the last chat message, that will bring you to our online map. So I will share my screen. Okay, so if you click on that link, it will bring you to this ArcGIS Online Map. And the best part about this is that you don't need any GIS experience to navigate this. So the link will bring you to this view of the project extent and the expected net value change. And to see all of the other layers that we have on here, you go to this tab and click on layers. And you'll see all of our data layers are organized into these folders. And to open up a folder, you click on the drop-down arrow. And so we have it organized into overlays, expected and conditional net value change, fire modeling rasters, and then a separate folder for each HVRA category. To turn on a layer, you click on the eyeball icon. So here I'm turning on the pod boundaries. Here are counties in Colorado with the labels on them. So you can have multiple layers on at the same time. You can also adjust the transparency for any given layer. So first click on the layer name and it'll open up the symbology and you can see what all the colors represent. And to adjust the transparency, you just drag this. So I'll turn on the counties and we will zoom in on Boulder County. So again, click on the layer that's on in order to bring up that symbology. So here we're looking at the composite expected net value change in Boulder County, with the red values being a negative change and green being more positive. Here you can roughly see the perimeter of the Cowlitz fire in Boulder County, and this just is quantifying the risk on that pixel. I will show a few of our fire modeling rasters. So here's burn probability. Again, you can adjust the transparency and see how that overlaps with vegetation or wildlife or other HVRAs. And then we have fire behavior for different weather scenarios. So here's the flame length for the 25th percentile versus a more high additionally, you can add your own layers to this if you have an ArcGIS account, which is free to create. And to add layers, you just click on the Add tab. You can add your own shape files that you can upload to your account. You can also browse layers. There's the Esri Living Atlas that you can add shape files like this, current wildfires, Landsat imagery. Many different layers are available through the Living Atlas. Also, if you're signed in with your own account, that gives you the ability to change the symbology. So if we're looking at something like wildlife, you can then change the colors and set it to your own preferences. So by creating your own account, you can add data and edit the symbology, and then that gives you the ability to then save it as your own version of the map, and it won't impact our version. It will always bring you back to this version. Yeah, I hope that wasn't too fast. I will stop sharing now.
Awesome, thanks, Jackie. Let me just go back to my sharing. So, so at that point, that's the end of our overview of the modeling process and the available data products. We're gonna jump into case studies. I wanted to leave a minute here if there were any pressing questions on really just the modeling approach, but we're gonna have a big section at the end for Q&A. So I might suggest we kind of keep rolling unless there's something quick that we missed or kind of jumped out as being really confusing.
Scott, I just remembered one point that I meant to make. If you're planning to use the GIS data from that Geodatabase, please try and download those files to your computer before modifying them in any way.
Cool. Sorry, I was just looking at the looking in the chat. I see Laura shared that the Colorado All Lands Risk Assessment, which hopefully many of you are aware of. That was a statewide risk assessment that Region 2 of the Forest Service had completed. It looks like they're going to be working to get that data shared as well. I think there's some nice additional applications, and that data is statewide. And there's some nice modeling in there that I think addresses some of the home loss risks, especially in grasslands, really well. So it's definitely a nice data set that hopefully they'll get shared out for everyone to work with as well. Then I see Megan's question. I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, this is Meg. Let me just clarify. Based on that map that was just shown, which is a great tool, especially in Boulder County, it looks like it doesn't extend all the way from boundary line to boundary line. Will that be a possibility in the future to show, given the circumstances for our grasslands and urban issues going on, it'd be great to show that modeling all the way out to the eastern boundary.
Yeah, definitely. You know, when we first initiated this process several years ago, it kind of started with conversations with the Arapahoe Roosevelt National Forest, and so that's why the boundary that you see is essentially a 10-kilometer buffer from the forest, the national forest boundary. And so we've had discussions about extending the analysis, and I think at this point, what I would say is that really the applications of this tool were largely around understanding risk, but particularly understanding you know, the role of vegetation management in modifying that risk. And so essentially that is to say that our modeling in the grasslands is not as robust in terms of quantifying risk to homes, and certainly not in terms of understanding how to modify those risks, since a lot of that comes down to things like construction and density and zoning and kind of questions outside of the purview of you know, vegetation management. So that coal assessment that the Forest Service did, or rather had done, they have some approaches in there that I think capture the risk of those types of, you know, structure ignition and really structure to structure spread that are greater concerns in those areas. And so at the moment, I would point you towards that data. I don't know if there's any Forest Service representatives that can speak to how people can get access to that in the meantime. But that would be my my spiel on the grasslands for the moment. Okay. Well, so for now, I think we'll continue on with our application case studies, and then as I said, we should have a good bit of time to have some further discussion about you know, applications, questions people still have, potentially planning for future meetings to really help continue to bring practitioners together to do collaborative planning. So back to my slides. Next up, we're going to have Brad White, who's going to be talking about the Grand County CWPP. So I'm going to go ahead and mute and let.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. You can probably go to the next slide there. So I'm Brad White. I'm the fire chief over at Grand Fire Protection District out of Granby. We here in Grand County, many of you are familiar with Grand County. We consider ourselves a headwaters community. We've got a tremendous amount of you know, transbasin diversion happening from, you know, west slope to east slope. I think we're the county providing the most water to the east slope, actually. Latest census, you know, we're about 16,000 residents, but the studies we do, you know, on the tourism side show that even in our shoulder seasons, we're about 80,000 folks in town these days, and 100,000 or 120,000 even, you know, in peak ski season and peak of the summer. So, you know, little lopsided, 16,000 residents trying to take care of, you know, amenities and infrastructure for as, you know, as much as 120, 140,000 folks at a time. And obviously we've, you know, a number of highways and railroad corridors. You know, we're a primary, I guess I should say we're a secondary hazmat corridor on, you know, the interstate system going east to west, and certainly the rail line coming through here brings some substantial risk, not just locally, but, you know, if those things are to be shut down for a number of days due to fire, it's an impact nationally, or at least in the states around us. So I've been involved over the years with 3 different CWPPs, and 2 of them through a revision already, and now this one. And Scott, you can probably hit the next slide there. In 2006, Grand County the county itself did their first CWPP, and we were about 2 years into a pine beetle epidemic, and recognized we were going to need, you know, some grant assistance for mitigation and things like that. And I would say we quickly threw together a CWPP to get that passed, to get eligible for some things. Since then, each of the fire districts in the county have done their own, and most of us have done a second, if not a third revision. But here, you know, post 2020 fire season and the fires preceding that, I think the county as a whole had an interest to take a bigger landscape look, and working with our federal partners, certainly it made sense to, rather than individual fire district CWPPs, to take an entire county look. So obviously CWPP's got some things it's supposed to do. It's a big public input process, establishes, what the wildland urban interface is within the community, and identifies values and risk, and provides that groundwork for preparedness and for planning for, not just on private ground, but hopefully with our federal partners as well, and identify priority areas there. So we just got started on our new CWPP countywide here last fall, and been working through the winter here. And go ahead, Scott. We were, one of our challenges here is the traditional risk maps that, Colorado State Forest Service and thus into the federal systems leaves out a large part of the Rocky Mountains there. And a couple reasons, having sat on stakeholder meetings, that I think we're dealing with here is that, the fuels have changed for sure, as we've gotten further into our pine beetle epidemic, and now, nearly 2 decades on the backside of the peak. We're still dealing with the effects there. But, our general warming trend in the country here, our season here, and our fire season here in Grand County at altitude used to be, about an 8-week season. And if we had 120% snowpack, we knew that fire season wasn't going to start until August. And with the changes in our forest, it became painfully obvious in the, fire seasons in 2014 and 16 that 8 days after the snow's off, we're into fire season. It doesn't take long for the forest floor to dry out now and be in those dry conditions again. The other thing we think we fight constantly is just when we start weighting population into risk maps, and people go to census data for that, typically you can see the big stripe of red along the Front Range, which I think is accurate, but I also think discounts some of the things and the importance of some of the the mountainous communities. So you can see anytime we go looking for grant money and things like that, and we've got to use a state or nationally accepted risk map, the challenge we're in for here. We're just not showing a lot of risk and basis. So go ahead, Scott. I think as we look at the last 22 years of fire history here, and we know we didn't have significant fire history in the 1900s until late in the 1900s here, but obviously there's some large fires there that had federal involvement. You see the East Troublesome, you see the Williams Fork on the south side of the county there, and the Sugarloaf before that, and the Spring Creek over on the other side. But we've overlaid all the starts that we're aware of that the fire districts have responded to. So a lot of those are, most of the starts the fire districts respond to are, we're able to keep them to a couple acres or a half acre or 1/10 of an acre or less. But increasingly we see 10-acre fires and 100-acre fires, and then of course we've had some of the big ones. So over 500 starts fire districts have responded to in the last 22 years, for a community that's growing and has more people in it every summer than it did the prior summer. It certainly adds to the risk. So go ahead, Scott. So we post East Troublesome Fire, Kevin and the gang of the Wrapup Roosevelt helped us out with a CMAP process, Community Mitigation Assistance Team, and we began working with CFRI a little bit there. And CFRI was able to bring the QRA to us and show us what they've calculated. And this is the map they bring, and you can certainly see the comparison to the traditional maps. And we felt like the process they've been through and the data that they've been using is significantly more accurate to our needs and what we feel like our risk is here in the community. So as we embarked on our community wildfire protection plan, we began looking on how do we best show the public what our real risk is as part of this public input process. And so began working with Scott and Mike and pulling in their data. And I think the big things for us is they've gone to a lot of effort on what are the actual fuel conditions now, and not the assumed conditions for a lodgepole forest. And obviously you just saw all the data that they went through, but what's the relative importance of all the water infrastructure, of all the utility corridors, of all the factors. And so this is the map. This is the same map you just saw from Jackie, but it's considerably different and a much better starting place for us than what we've been working with. So go ahead. So as part of our process, of course, I think the QRA map is pretty much a standalone product. We could use that as our risk map and be good. And I think as a fire chief and somebody who promotes wildfire mitigation, that's a standalone product and a great place to start. But the CWPP is a community input based process. And so, we took that, and you can see we created the WUI definition map. What's the WUI? And as opposed to the first CWPPs we did, 2006 and 2008 and all that. In the old days, we just took the forest boundary and created a 1.5 mile or 2 mile buffer in there. And so these days, as we look at landscape, we start in the community and work our way back out now. So you can kind of see on the top left there our current WUI definition map. Took a look and worked with the scoping groups and the stakeholder groups on many of the same things that the QRA pulled in, the crown fire activity maps, the flame link maps, the rate of spread maps, and took all the input that we've gotten from the community, from the public, from the core group, the different stakeholder groups, and worked our way back to a very similar map to what the QRA's produced. We've also spent a lot of time with some of our federal partners and their fuel modelers that work in our environment quite a bit, and just trying to identify, the right fuel model to use in these maps that, not the traditional lodgepole, but really the timber and slash type fuel model that we've really got here in Greene County now. So go ahead, Scott. So here is we're still in draft form. We're still rolling out for the final draft comes out for public comment here in about 2 weeks. But here's the current CWPP risk assessment map that we want to move forward with, and you can see it's very similar to the QRA risk assessment. It's obviously emphasized a little bit more on the private ground and the infrastructure we've got. And a little less so probably on the federal ground further out of town, which I think is how it should be. So, this isn't a forest management tool. This is a community wildfire protection plan. So they've got a little different purpose. So we're, one of the things I like is obviously around the populations and the communities, the town of Granby, you see marked there, into the south, the Fraser Valley, and Grand Lake to the north, and along the central corridors there's a lot of red. In our opinion, that's where the homes are and the communities are and the infrastructure that supports them, and the travel corridors, transportation corridors. And so that makes sense. But one of the other things I like about the output data is there's a lot of green in there. There's a lot of places where fire could bring a positive impact on the landscape. And for us, talking with our community, whether it's trying to support the federal prescribed burning or trying to support, managed fires and things like that, I think this is going to be a good basis to start with. And look, there are places in our community where fire's okay, if done correctly and treated correctly and managed correctly. It'll bring positive impacts, on the landscape there, and provide additional protection, for the communities in the long run. So you can kind of see a lot of green to the north side of the county there in the East Troublesome Burn Scar, and on the far west side there in the old Silver Creek Burn Scar. And hard to tell, if you're familiar with the Williams Fork fire down there, you can see there's definitely some lessened risk down in that area, but it's still there. So we, again, we're rolling this out in draft form here in the next couple of weeks, and are going to try to get some more public comment and, put it in front of our federal partners too, and see what adjustments we need. but hope to work with CFRI as we move forward and see how often we think we need to revisit this. 5 years might be a little frequent, but my guess is every 10 years is probably not enough, as we would normally do with a CWPP. So that's kind of where we're headed with it. I think it's going to be a great tool, and great visualization for our community. And we've got a real transit community. So anytime we can do something in maps and images instead of a long meeting and an explanation, we're just going to be that much more effective. So that's it. Thanks, Scott.
Awesome. Thank you, Brad. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, maybe note them down, and we can come back around at the end to dig into CWPP. But I think we'll keep rolling through our case studies. Obviously, feel free to shoot it in the chat as well. So up next, we've got Kevin McLaughlin. He's going to be talking about some applications to their ongoing NEPA process. All right,
Yeah,
there he is.
Thanks, Scott. My name's Kevin McLaughlin. I'm the district ranger on the Boulder Ranger District. And yeah, I'm just going to kind of chat through a little bit today about how we utilize the risk assessment process in the St. Vrain NEPA planning. So you can go ahead and kick it to the next slide. Based on the participant list here, it seems like probably this project is no stranger to most, but just a little bit of background. This is a 103,000 acre analysis area that encompasses the northern half of the Boulder Ranger District. So, basically from east to west, the project spans from the shrublands to subalpine forest types and fire regimes. And the big thing about this analysis area is that 35% of it includes other land jurisdictions. So really highlights an even greater need for cross-boundary collaboration needs and consideration of an all lands risk assessment. From a purpose and need standpoint, kind of these project objectives look pretty similar to the usual suspects you'd see in a lot of fuels and forest health planning projects these days. And the proposed management actions include also typical kinds of tools like prescribed fire, tree thinning, sanitation salvage, strategic tree planting, and some combinations of mastication, chipping, and tree pruning. So you can go ahead and advance to the next slide, please. So once again, getting to the point of a fully developed purpose and need and proposed action that was ready for public scoping for this project was a fairly intensive process that included years of collaboration and planning efforts. There was a lot of time spent engaging with partners in communities and developing a shared vision for desired future watershed and forest conditions. In Boulder County, an MOU, a memorandum of understanding was signed that included 13 parties from federal, state, local governments. That was signed in 2020 and really kind of set the tone for establishing a collaborative framework for all the parties to set mutual goals in Boulder County. Lots of engagement occurred over the years. There's the St. Vrain Forest Health Partnership, which is a collaborative of over 100+ partners working together on fire resilience and looking at community benefits to forest ecosystems and water quality. So lots of community planning meetings were hosted before and during the development of the proposed action for this project. There were 8 community meetings that occurred in the St. Vrain watershed that basically led to the development of a list of river restoration projects that reflected individual community values as well as forest restoration projects. The partnership has a science team that was established to make sure that the project was developed in consideration of best available science. And the science team was also critical in the development of an adaptive management process for the project. So, and just this map in the background of the slide here shows the outputs from one of the agreements that were made in the MOU, where the parties work together to collaboratively develop a map of preliminary treatment focus areas in the county. Next slide, please. So, we developed this project utilizing a condition-based management framework, which is not new to the Forest Service necessarily, but it's new to us on this forest. And the short of it is that basically there's no traditional project units that are drawn on maps targeted for specific management actions. Rather, it's more of the project outlines sort of a description of a shared vision in the context of the best available science and desired future condition. And this slide just kind of shows a visual representation and a tabular example of the existing desired future conditions for a ponderosa pine stand within the project area. Next slide, please. So moving throughout the planning process, we formally scoped the project with the public last July and began analysis in August. And so, that at the same time, I would just mention that I came into the district here halfway through the process. So this process already began before I was actually on the district, which was an interesting place to be in. And when I came in, I started realizing, we're kicking off analysis, and I started realizing there were a lot of environmental analysis considerations, that factors that were driving us to really kind of maybe slow down a little bit, take a pause, take a deeper dive into treatment feasibility, and look a little bit harder at the risk assessment, and basically under the thought that all this collaborative engagement has happened over the years. It's taken years to get to this point, and it sure would be a shame if we kind of dropped the ball or left the door open for us to get litigated through the environmental analysis process. So we kind of slowed down a little bit. And I just kind of threw together a few things that at least were going through my mind as a line officer and a decision maker, and someone who's going to be signing this NEPA decision, is what do we need to make sure that we've got really sound analysis that we can bring forward. So on the pre-decisional side of things, we're looking at treatment feasibility and what's possible. What are the things that we can actually do out there? We're using this condition-based management process, but we really need to be able to frame it up for our internal resource specialists, that even though we're not prescribing exactly when or where, we really need to know what are the approximate number of acres that we're going to be treating over the course of the implementation of this project, which could span up to 20 years. And so they can really, scope out and look at the scale and intensity of the analysis they need for whether it's water resources, wildlife habitat, on and on and on. And so the other key piece here pre-decisionally is that through the public scoping process, we've received quite a bit of concern, issues that were raised that maybe the Forest Service might just be writing themselves a blank check to do whatever they want to do whenever they feel like it. And so going back and looking at treatment feasibility in the context of the risk assessment was really important for me in my mind, so we could really do our due diligence at disclosing in our final environmental assessment how we were going to attack this, showing that we actually have a plan. And so anyway, and then on the risk assessment side of things, we're just really looking at where are those places where we know we can do the work, get the most benefit based on our collaboratively developed HVRAs. And where can we focus our limited resources that are in alignment with the partners' priorities to make a wise investment of our funds. Next slide, please. So at this point, in the process of the planning, we're kind of timing out our ID team. I asked my resource specialist to sort of take a break for a minute, because really what we wanted to do was, I wanted to bring in our implementers and see where they thought we could actually implement treatments based on their on the ground knowledge and their implementation expertise. And so we basically, I dialed up CFRI and said, hey, I need you guys to come to the office and help us work through, we worked through a one-day session with our implementers and some folks from CFRI to kind of work through setting the parameters for where we could and couldn't do work in this project area, utilizing the constraint analysis that Ali was talking about earlier. And so basically this table just represents what we use for the implementation constraints. And the cool part about it is that, it also includes costs, which down the road is going to help us, project available treatments and really start looking at, what's economically feasible for us to do given our limited resources. So next slide, please. So as a result of this first step, the feasibility analysis using the constraint analysis, I coined the term feasibility analysis, but we really just use the constraint analysis. And this is what we came up with. And some key things to note, I think, would be that our implementers, after we had that one-day session, our implementers spent about another week validating the outputs of the constraint analysis using their on-the-ground knowledge. So we sat around and looked through the outputs and kind of said, hey, is this lining up with what we know is on the ground? Is this actually possible? How does this line up with previous treatments we've already done? And so the neat thing about this is that, we're starting to kind of go from this bigger scale thing, whittling things down. We took our 100,000 acre analysis area and started bringing it down to the feasible treatment types. So we're kind of getting a better sense now of getting answers to their questions of what and where. And the other thing to mention here is that because we're just looking at National Forest System lands, you'll see there's a bunch of gray blocks on this map. So our analysis here only looked at National Forest Service lands, but we know that we're still going to have to we still need to take our feasibility projections and bring that back to the implementation table when we're collaborating on the all lands risk assessment with our partners. Next slide, please. So then, so the next step after the feasibility assessment was to overlay the results of the feasibility analysis with the risk assessment. And so this map just kind of shows the results of that effort. And so the polygons with the darkest shade of green here show the greatest reduction in total expected net value change, which would be synonymous with the greatest benefit for treatment. And then the background displays a composite ENVC from the risk assessment to the HVRAs. So that's a lot of acronyms, but you guys got me talking in acronyms now. So anyway, so basically the areas with the most ENVC illustrate those places where the wildfire impact on the HVRAs would be the greatest. Next slide, please. And this is just a zoomed in version of the proposed treatment polygons where we would expect to see the greatest benefit to HVRAs. And once again, this is the kind of information that we want to bring back to the table when we're planning these collaborative treatments with our stakeholders and partners. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so basically there's a wide variety of applications, obviously, of the risk assessment. These are just some of the ones that I captured for the St. Vrain project. For this project, we're still working on completing our EA, which I hope to sign a decision on in June. But having gone through this process, gone through the analysis, utilizing the risk assessment, really gives us the opportunity to plan on the front end and prioritize treatments based on known and assumed funding sources. So, you know, by the time we sign a decision, we're ready to start implementing, and we're not now figuring it out on the fly. You know, it's a great communication tool, and it's really helped us. It's helped me feel more comfortable as a line officer that's getting ready to sign a decision for a big project area, that you know, we have a good plan in place and a good strategy that represents the values of the communities, the surrounding communities involved. So anyway, that I'll leave it at that. There's probably much more to get into, but I probably blew over my time, and appreciate everyone calling in and listening to these presentations. This is a great topic to work through for practitioners.
Wrong button. Thanks so much, Kevin. That was awesome. I think we got to keep rolling. I'll quickly address Brad's question in the chat here and say that our treatment assumptions were assuming the traditional limitations based on mechanical treatment. So staying off the higher slope angles, but we can talk more about ways to do your own feasibility analysis based on other equipment or treatment options. So yeah, we'll kick it over to Wes and keep it rolling. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Wesley Page. I'm the Fuels Program Manager on the Wrapup Roosevelt. I'm going to briefly talk about how we used some of the results from the QRA to look at where we can prioritize pod boundary treatments. So many of you are probably aware that under the bipartisan infrastructure law, we got a new authority to create fuel breaks up to 1,000 feet wide, up to 3,000 acres for each individual project. And so ever since that came about, we've been super interested in applying that CE on the forest. And so this presentation is basically summarizes how we took some of that data to help us look at where we would potentially make those investments. So next slide. Yeah. So I guess I want to make it clear, like this is a very old question. Where we should invest in preparing for future wildfires has been talked about for a very long time. This paper here, Fuel Breaks and Other Fuel Modification, is a very good paper to reference. It's from the 70s. It talks about a lot of the fundamental basics of what we're trying to do when we're creating fuel breaks, where they should be located, how wide they should be. But I just use it as a reference point to remember that this has been done in the past. And back then they were using aerial photos, just driving and walking the ground. In that document, there's a lot of good, information about how they actually went out on the landscape and chose locations where they think they could hold fires. I just find it very interesting. So next slide. But today we have obviously a lot more data, a lot more tools that could help us at least get a better sense of where we should look to make these investments. And this is the QRA is one of them. We have the work that's been done at the Rocky Mountain Research Station that folks on CFRI have been involved with. Potential control lines. We did the pod workshop where using some of these tools to collaboratively develop, locations, identify pods and locations on their boundaries that are relevant for fire control. So yeah, I wanted to take the stuff that's been done in the past, utilize this new information, our new tools, and to see where we could come up with some ideas or places where we'd want to start looking at putting in some fuel breaks. So next slide. So there are a lot of examples of how this has been done in the past. I just pulled a couple here that I've been personally involved with. So on the Cleveland National Forest, you know, there's for many, many years, their program has been focused around creating fuel breaks on that landscape. And they've had assessments of ranking what fuel breaks need priority for maintenance and for creation. And that table on the bottom there are some of the factors that they looked at. Workability, cost, there's operational scores, values at risk. And then there's a screen capture from Central and Eastern Washington. So after some recent fire seasons up there, the state has made a big investment into wildfire risk assessments. And one of their outputs is determining where there's benefits to wildfire response. And again, there's many factors that go into them: homes and infrastructure, drinking water. So all of these involve some kind of subjective assessment of pulling together what factors are most applicable, how you rank them relative to each other. So although we have new tools that help us quantitatively define the factors, there's always this subjective piece that can't be done away with. So next slide. So knowing that, and given my previous experience doing a similar assessment, I figured, since I knew, you know, the data that we have in the QRA, there's a lot of it available. There's 3 key factors that I chose that I believe capture most of the key information. The idea is that I want to keep it simple. And this isn't a magic. It's not going to tell us exactly when and where we need to go. It's going to help us guide general locations that kind of maximize these factors, and where making investment going on the ground, just like they did back in the 70s and the 60s, go back to the ground and figure out, okay, how are we going to make this work in this landscape, knowing that it's been identified as a high priority. So the 3 factors, the 2 right from the QRA is burn probability, CNVC for the WUI, high HVRAs. And then I don't think Scott has talked about this, but Scott had developed a tool to kind of look at where we could make the most change in suppression difficulty index. And to me, that was a very good idea and very valuable, in that it shows us where we can actually change the outcome. So given those 3 factors, I wanted to combine those and help us look at where are those priority locations. So next slide. So taking those 3 factors, I did a forest-wide view, but this can be done for smaller areas. Rescaled and calculated weighted averages for those different factors, and looked at different weighting scenarios to look at, okay, what are the pod boundary treatments where we can change the outcome, improve suppression effectiveness. They're likely to impact, you have a high burn probability, and they're near some high value assets in terms of WUI and infrastructure. And this map is the whole forest here. You can see kind of the highlighted area is the top 100 miles that were identified in that analysis. So those are all, I clipped this. There's a lot of private lands in there. This is not including that, but it could. So that's just forest only on the top 100 miles. And next slide. And so this is where we're at now, is that we took this data. We had a meeting before Christmas, talked about it with our collaborators to say, okay, hey, we've identified some areas where we think we can further refinement is necessary, and what do you think? And the first one that popped out is just outside Estes Valley. There's we call it the Pearson Park Fuel Break CE. There's a road network in there that we're looking at beginning very shortly to make the initial investment of creating these fuel breaks. And that's right there in that Pearson Park area. So the next steps are, getting out to the field, verifying conditions, determining what makes sense on the ground. And so that's pretty much how I use the tool is I don't want to get wrapped up in the individual modeling of individual sections of road. But I believe this is valuable, at least to get us started and to identify some key locations to start making the investments. So that's all I got. That's the end.
Awesome. Thanks, Wes. There are a couple of things popped up in the chat for you if you want to just take a look while Max is going. But yeah, that was awesome. All right, I'm going to stop sharing for the moment, and we're gonna kick it over to Max Erickson, who should be popping in.
Thanks,
There he
Scott.
is.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for hopping on. I'm Max Erickson with Colorado State Forest Service. I'm our supervisory forester for the Fort Collins field office. And I'm here to talk about a specific kind of case study and application of the QRA here in Larimer County. Last year, around the February timeframe, the Colorado Strategic Wildfire Action Program came out, COSWAP, through Colorado DNR. And we saw that as an opportunity with a bunch of local practitioners to, make a big ask for some grant funding to get some good work done out there. So, this was a new program at the time, and that COSWAP application had a few different facets of it. Specifically, we were looking at the landscape resilience investment application, which was, intended to tie together large-scale landscape style treatments. There's a few others, but that's what we were looking at there. And, I'd like to just point back to what Scott said earlier with the QRA, really coordinating the action, across partners, across the landscape and different scales is a huge benefit that we saw with the QRA. And, we kind of framed this within the Northern Colorado Fireshed Ops Committee framework, working at the county scale here in Larimer County. And, two of the big goals that we have at the operations committee is, increase pre-project planning, talking to partners, finding out where they're working and where we can work together, and then also seeking joint grants and funding opportunities like this one. So we got together when this application was rolled out, and the intent for this application was countywide. And so it's a pretty large landscape to figure out where we're going to work. But, we had, a bunch of different partners there from Larimer County Office of Emergency Management, the Larimer County Sheriff's Office, the Conservation Corps here in Larimer County, as well as the Conservation District, a couple of the watershed coalitions, Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed, and also the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition, as well as us with the State Forest Service. And so, we were starting that conversation. We quickly realized, we wanted to figure out where we were all working and where some of the priorities were. And so we had reached out to Scott at CFRI. We knew they were working on the QRA at the time. Some of the collaborative meetings that I'm sure you all were in were occurring. And so we wanted to use the QRA to help frame this conversation. So Scott and the CFRI folks were kind enough to print us out a bunch of poster-sized maps with a lot of the HVRAs, the different fire modeling and the different stuff that they had at the time, which was useful because when we're looking across scales, across different organizations who have different priorities or different lens on where we're going, and put it in the context of this shared goal of a joint application, which is meant to treat landscape scale, it really helped us huddle together and start identifying projects across the landscape and see where we could link up. So, this is where the magic always happens. You get around a table with a bunch of posters and you start drawing on them, and those conversations really start happening. And so this was really aided by that, the QRA being available to us and looking at a bunch of those different maps and having that conversation of, which ones are important to us, what priorities are important to our organizations, what, sort of capacity or resources can we bring together to put that application in, and really just have that lens. So we ended up, meeting and talking, and we ended up with 2 applications, as we were allowed as a county to submit, and they were $1 million asks on each one. What I thought was cool to see was we had multiple organizations on each application putting in their niche effort, from landscape scale fuel mechanical treatments to the sheriff's office doing some roadside field break with the local crew there, and having the QRA as some of the justification for why that was important. We ended up as a county being awarded one of those, and ultimately learned through some feedback with the grant committee that one ranked highest overall. And so that's a pretty awesome thing to have, and then get some good work done on the ground. I think being able to have these conversations effectively and efficiently and quickly, which QRA helped with, is pretty important. Increasing pace and scale is everything we're trying to do. So I'll just quickly, shout out to all the folks that were involved in that process, and also Scott with CFRI of helping. I see this as a really good tool to have those shared conversations, look at different priorities. There's a bunch of different, composite scores depending upon, what you might be looking for as an organization, whether it be the WUI and home risk reduction or watershed resources. You can look at those different layers, but also see what the current opportunity is, or the grant that you might be looking to seek funding. We all know that those grants are looking for different types of projects, and so I think this QRIVE just does a really good job of having a pretty big scope of what it looks at, and also looking at some of the current modeling, with some of the fuels characteristics we have out there, and as well as recent fire scars. Just real briefly, I'll mention as well, there's some other planning processes that are happening in Larimer County as well. We've started to incorporate some of these into CWPP processes, like Chief White was mentioning earlier. So another good tool, and also in some of the communication parts that we have with the public, or just internally amongst partners. It's a really good tool to have those conversations and figure out where we need to go. With that, I will pass it on. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Max. Appreciate your insight. All right, we got one last speaker, and then we can jump into our discussion section. All right, I think I got my sharing going. So Andrew Slack is going to talk about some potential aspects or other applications at the project scale.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, we're ahead of schedule, and I'm going to be short and sweet too. So I think all the presenters so far have clearly established this is a really good planning tool at the landscape scale when you're looking at an entire county or an entire national forest, or even that 100,000 acre St. Vrain project planning area. But it's a really helpful tool to help all the collaborators and stakeholders decide where to treat. But I mostly work with managers on the ground in the Upper South Platte watershed, and we've done a couple QWRAs down there as well. And so I've been starting to think about how we can use the RADS modeling tool and the QWRA mapping tools to plan across scales, all the way down to making on the ground decisions at fine scale, individual projects and treatment units. So I wanted to highlight that a little bit, zoom in much more, and kind of see what these maps look like and how we can use this information to make decisions. And go to the next slide. And I realize, so yeah, the couple of the things that I want to highlight, planning across scales is something that we always talk about, but using the same tool for planning across a forest to planning at a project really kind of helps gel everything together. I think it can get lost in translation how a landscape scale plan translates down to on the ground decisions, but the QWRA here really helps kind of connect all of that planning across scales together. When you're making on the ground decisions for any specific project, really what I'm talking about here is a values-based approach. So one of the first steps that we all take when we're designing a project, developing prescriptions, is really understanding what values are in the project area and neighboring the project area. That should dictate what prescription decisions we make, and even helping to identify the desired future conditions that we want. So, the big theme here is that the QWRA is a values-based approach. There's so much of a collaborative effort just to identify all the values that we can model spatially. There's those 20+ values that were included. But because we have maps for all of those, you can really zoom into the project scale and kind of understand what parts of the project are being influenced by which HVRAs and HVRA categories. So, using this information, scrolling through all these different map products at the project scale, it can really help you clarify your project goals, really identify your desired conditions, and then even go as far to help you develop prescriptions, especially if you're varying your prescription across a treatment unit. And then lastly, I really want to highlight, like, most managers, when they go to a stand, they're familiar with it. They know where their values are. They know what they want to do. But being able to produce these maps and show on a map where the WUI is, where water risk is, and how much risk is exposed to those values can really help managers communicate their treatment plans with stakeholders and with the public. I think this is going to be really important on the Arapahoe Roosevelt, especially as the forest is taking on some conditions-based management projects. There can be a lot of ambiguity, and as Kevin said, it's hard to build that trust when people feel like you're just giving a blank check to the Forest Service to do what they want. So using the QWRA at the project scale to communicate to the public what you're doing, why you're doing it, is really helpful, and it really just gives visual communication and justification for managers on the ground when making their decisions. That's really what I wanted to say. I really want to encourage all the managers on this call to use the ArcGIS Online Map that Jackie showed. You can upload your project shapefiles there, zoom way in, and turn off on and off layers. I really encourage managers to make lots of maps, print those maps off, draw all over them to help create your treatment units, to start writing about prescriptions, where you want to put a patch cut, where you want to do groupy clumpy thinning, and all of that type of stuff. So yeah, I just really encourage managers to use that ArcGIS Online tool and upload your project shapefiles to it to zoom way in. I unfortunately been having issues with my account on ArcGIS Online, so I had to kind of download the data and tweak it a little bit in ArcMap, but I did want to run through one project really quickly so you guys can start to see what this looks like. So we're talking about the middle of the area here. This is the area that Kevin and Wesley were both talking about. I actually borrowed some potential treatment polygons from Wesley to look at, but yeah, next slide. So these are the treatment areas. We're now zoomed into where that black box was. And again, the other advantage I really encourage managers to use ArcGIS Online is because you already have the layers symbology correct. If you download this data and bring it into ArcMap, it's really difficult to get the symbology right. So that's one advantage to using the ArcGIS Online, or using Arc Pro and then getting those that layer X file that Ali has in there, but this doesn't work as well in ArcMap. Okay, so next slide, there should be a box. I just want to highlight, yep, that's the treatment unit that we're going to zoom way into. Next slide. So here's kind of what it looks like. We can see that purple line is actually a pod boundary. Pod boundary lines, that's a value. That's not a value that was modeled and really considered too much in HVRA, but I think it's important to recognize that there are values here that won't show up, and we should try and still visually get them on the map. So, a pod boundary line is definitely a value here that's going to influence the on-ground decisions in this treatment unit. This treatment, I think it's about 300 acres in size. Going much smaller in this, you start to kind of lose the power of these mapping tools. But I just wanted to highlight, like, you can get down to the 200-300 acre scale here, and it still is a useful tool. Next slide. So this is what the composite ENVC layer looks like. You can see, there's a much higher risk just outside of the treatment boundary to the south, but within the treatment boundary, it seems pretty uniform. So then we can start to bring in the category layers to really understand what values are actually driving the risk within this treatment boundary. So scroll through. This is vegetation, pretty even. There's some areas where it's going to have some benefit, but it seems like we have different ecosystem types here that are going to respond to wildfire. Next one. This is risk to water. So water doesn't seem like to be a huge player within this treatment boundary. You can see south of the treatment boundary, water is starting to have elevated risk. Next one. This is WUI. So you can see there's really no risk to WUI within the treatment boundary. But again, just right on the other side of the south boundary of this treatment, there is a lot of risk to WUI. There's some homes there, and that is going to greatly influence what decisions are made within this treatment boundary. Next slide. This is, it says vegetation. Sorry, that's a typo. This is actually recreation. So I think it's really following the hiking trail that goes through the middle of the treatment boundary there. And this is, again, it's the aggregated risk to the category of recreation. So if you really want to figure out what recreation are we talking about a campground versus a hiking trail? Again, you can pull in those layers on ArcMap Online and really identify the specific HVRAs and get more specific than just the category risk. So you can see there's much more influence or risk to recreation or to this hiking trail within the treatment boundary. So, considering how you would modify your treatments as you get to the center of the unit around the hiking trail. Next slide. This is infrastructure. Again, it's pretty widespread, and you'd have to kind of pull in the individual HVRA layers in here to understand what infrastructure we're talking about. And then next slide. So coming back to the composite wildfire risks, some things that are standing out about this treatment unit, you have the pod boundary on the eastern side, and you have the WUI on the bottom, on the southern end of the treatment boundary. I would say that those two values are really driving risk here and would likely really drive management decisions here. You can see Wes has already started to kind of divide treatment units based off the pod boundary. And this is a really good place to start. Maybe within the buffer of that pod boundary, you're going to be way more aggressive. And then that sets up the rest of the treatment unit for prescribed fire or wildfire use. So it can show you how, you change your thinning intensity based off the values around, or even your treatment method between prescribed fire and thinning. And then next slide. I think that's it, actually. And that's all I have. So thank you. But, my big take home message is this is a tool that can be used at the project scale. And I just really encourage managers to explore ArcGIS Online and print tons of maps, use it for communication with the public, with your stakeholders, use it in grant applications. There's been examples in Jefferson County of them printing out specific maps when they're going for like a restore grant and restoring wildlife habitat, and it can show specifically what wildlife habitat is in their treatment boundary. So there's tons of different uses at the project scale as well. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian Drew. Yeah, appreciate all the speakers, and I got to point out we are on schedule to the minute, so that everyone was really dialed in there. So yeah, I think at this point the hope is to use the rest of our time together to ask questions about anything that was discussed, and then also start maybe brainstorming next steps of what sort of maybe additional support groups feel like they need, whether there's maybe some value in subsequent meetings, potentially based on smaller sub-geographies, just to help foster further sort of collaborative planning. But I think we're going to try and be pretty open in here. I have a couple of prompts, but I think for the most part, I'd like to sort of let all the participants drive the discussion. And before we get into that, I got a message. I think Ali has some more specific comments about the treatment feasibility assumptions and things like that. So I'll let her go, and then if people want to raise hands or put questions in the chat, I'd love to have a deeper discussion about our applications here. So we'll stop sharing.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Yeah, so Brad, your question brought up an important point that Scott touched on, but I just want to clarify again while we have everyone. We intentionally stamped in those 8 fuels treatments at the broadest spatial scale possible, so that those canopy and surface fuel adjustments are applied throughout the entire landscape. There are those specific feasibility and cost rasters that can be used if those assumptions reflect your local kind of values and expectations. So you could use that feasibility raster to clip down those EMVC rasters to only consider pixels within feasible area. You can also self-define your own feasibility and or cost and clip those rasters accordingly. So we structured it so that those layers can be as versatile as possible. Yeah, I think that's it for me.
Cool. All right. Maybe helpful to have some more training on the tool. Yeah, we could, if there's interest, maybe have a focused meeting. I think Arc, so when you get on Arc Online, there's also a lot of they have a lot of different manuals and stuff, and so you can do some self-learning on that. I will say that even for people who aren't super deep in the GIS world, getting used to navigating that page is not as big a lift as say learning Arc Pro, but even then I think there's lots of resources. So yeah, we can certainly meet that need. All right, anybody, these could be questions. We could just, any discussion, if there's, I guess a question I have for everyone here is somewhat related to Meg's point there, but what other things, information, trainings can we provide to help people start working with this data to a greater extent? Because obviously we see a lot of value in it. I think that the more people who are using it, the more it can foster true collaborative planning. But yeah, so is there anything else we can provide to our participants here? Was the fire hose of information a little too much for a morning?
Hey, good morning, Scott. This is Keith Long with Mountain View Fire. I do have a question.
Great.
I just sent in the chat to Jackie if she would have some time, because I think on your mapping products, and Scott, you and I talked last week, or earlier this week, excuse me, what I'm trying to do is specific for Mountain View Fire. So we handle the Gross Lake area, Flagstaff, El Dorado, Superior, and then we go all the way out to the I-25 corridor. And I think both myself and Meg Halford, we've already sent stuff into Colorado State to get their forest access atlas, excuse me. But if it'd be all right, and I just sent Jackie I think it would be very beneficial, especially at my level, because we are starting to put together our CWPP right now. Our plan is it's going to mirror and parallel Boulder County. So I think for me, especially, and I'm sure other people are much more versed in this, that would just be a huge benefit.
Mm. Yeah, I appreciate that. So I understand you mean just the data access, or using the AGOL for that purpose?
Well, actually both, but what I'd like to do is just take some of your material and specific to our district, and if I can take the maps spin, fold, just like making pods. I think that'd be beneficial. I know there's people out there who can do this. It's just, I didn't know if that'd be an option or available.
Gotcha. Yeah, we can. Nope. Go ahead, Jack.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I saw your message, so I can send you an email, Keith.
That'd be great. Hey, this was great, by the way. I appreciate everybody's input. Very valuable.
Awesome. All right. I see Brad, you got your hand up.
Yeah, hey, just to foster further discussion, and thanks everyone, CFRI, for doing this. We're actually using some components of this in some of our work, which is great in the Big Thompson right now. And so it's really good pieces of it that I think we can use. But one of the things I just wanted to caution people against, looking at that small scale discussion was really interesting to me, but just like if we just look at things on a pixel basis only, sometimes we are not evaluating how watersheds respond following fire. And so then those post-fire impacts. So even if you're outside of those red pixels, it doesn't mean that won't have an impact on water, for example, which is that last example. And so I think, while a really good tool, we do need to kind of think about what we're really looking at and how forests and watersheds function after fire. So throw that out for discussion if anyone wants to.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. I appreciate that point. And, just to carry on, I mean, I think that with a lot of the resources, for various reasons, there's a scale at which you shouldn't drill down, too far, like the pixel level, for example. I might ask Allie to speak a little bit to the watershed modeling, because we do account for, even the individual pixel scale or, really fine scales. It's not, well, anyway, Allie can go ahead and explain how that transmission of watershed risk works. But
yeah, so since we have hit you with a lot of information, I will just direct you to, there's a whole detailed appendix in our technical report focused just on the water supply modeling. I will say here that at the pixel level, we do consider routing of hill slope erosion through streams into infrastructure. So there is a routing component integrated into those distributed raster products. And then there's also relative importance weight as well, integrated from forest to faucets ranking. But I agree that it is a complicated topic, and I would suggest you go read the appendix for more information, and feel free to reach out if you have further questions.
Thanks, Allie. That helped.
And Brad, just to kind of circle back to what I was talking about a little bit, I think, the thing I really want to emphasize here is that there's all these mapping tools that were created based off HVRAs and values. So at that project scale, I think its best use is really just being able to identify your values and where they are within your treatment boundary, and then take that to think about how that would influence those on the ground decisions. I think what you're talking about, though, that gets back to more landscape scale planning, evaluation, and monitoring. So I was just hoping to show a potential use for this for very specific on the ground decisions. But of course, at some point, those decisions get aggregated up and are going to have an impact on water, regardless of whether water's driving the risk in a boundary or not. So yeah, I have the same caution. Like, there is definitely a point where you're not getting any value with these tools, but at least from a standpoint at that project scale, to identify your values and where they are within the project boundary, I think it's very useful.
yeah, go ahead, Daniel. Nope. One second.
All right, we got it. Yep. That was awesome. Thanks so much for all that. I mean, this is a really cool tool. We had a quick discussion, so I got two questions, one that we might be able to answer and one we probably can't, but we might as well bring it up. The first one, yesterday, we were talking to some folks with a fire protection district, and we were mentioning this tool as something they could use. I know the Forest Health Portal, the CoRap is what I'm trying to say, or remembering it by, is going through some updates, and they need this data kind of now. Is this something that they can use to print out some maps for kind of a CWPP level process pretty quickly without a lot of knowledge? I mean, should we do another one of these for those kinds of partners, or how do y'all see that working? And then the second question is this, the $5 million question, is this what we're going to use for the Fireshed to rank projects and give out money?
Yeah, as you indicated, I am not in the position to answer question number 2.
Right.
There are ongoing discussions, but for the first question about maps, obviously, I think the slickest way to use this data is if you have the skills to bring it in, ArcMap or ArcPro and build your own maps. But you can print simple maps straight from that Arc Online platform, and so that's really the simplest tool that we're pointing people towards. Probably still a bit of a learning curve there. I don't know if in terms of the map printing functionality, Jackie, I don't know if you have any comments on that. But yeah, I would point to Arc Online as the quickest way to do that, even if it's just taking screenshots.
I don't personally have experience with printing straight from Arc Online. I do see that there is a print option on the version even if you're not signed into your account. So I'm looking at that right now, but I would also recommend just taking screenshots of whatever data you add to what we've already provided.
Great. Thanks, Scott and Jackie. That's probably the way to go. And yeah, we were kind of talking through that yesterday. I just wanted to bring it to the group there. The beauty of CoRap is it did have that print function, and it did have that reporting function where you get 80 pages with all the maps you need, and then you kind of grab those from the Word doc and put them into your grant application. And that's the level that a lot of partners are able to deal with the data at. And so, yeah, Arc Online, it's got its fun issues here and there, but I think you're right. A screenshot of that would probably be the way to go. I think we can teach them how to get up on that. And then I think, you'll start to see a lot of grant applications at the county and state level with screenshots from ArcGIS Online. So something to think about there, which is probably perfectly sufficient. And yeah, question number 2, just throwing it out there. We've got, and I did not know about the coal tool. I'm going to check that out as well. Man, we've got so much good data and so much good modeling for designing our projects now, from the region to the Fireshed to the CWPP, to the individual community modeling that Ember Alliance and others have done for some really good recent CWPPs. What we talked about before is pick the one that's reddest and throw it in your grant application. That's not my favorite method, but yeah, I guess we can get into that at some point, is how to go about thinking through all those. Thanks, guys. Really good. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
If
Daniel.
I can share my screen again, I can show what that PDF would look like for printing straight from ArcPro. So here's just a PDF. If you go to the print and you are currently zoomed in on your computer. I'm getting a message from Zoom, so I'm not sure if you can hear me right now.
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, good. Yeah, so it's just very basic.
Oh, looks like we Looks like we lost Jackie. Oh.
I'm back, but yeah, I don't know how much of that you heard. But the printing could be useful straight from ArcGIS Online.
Cool. Thank you, Jackie.
Messed up the formatting. I was just putting some our emails in the chat for further follow up if anybody wants to reach out directly after this. Yeah, we've got a little more time if there's some more discussion points, questions, really anything people want to talk about. And yeah, if not, Mike's got a comment in there, but yeah, if not, we can certainly wrap up a little early. Oh, awesome, Tony, what you got for us?
Yeah, hey, I think one thing that I also find interesting about especially the net value change products that come out for different areas, it really also highlights that, I think a lot of us focus on the forest vegetation side of the equation. In a lot of areas, even with abundant forest management, it doesn't change that net value, a huge increment, right? It's nearly impossible to drive it to zero, certainly, and we certainly wouldn't want to for the ecology. And I think it's important to then raise that there are other mitigation actions besides forest management to address fire risk. I think that's probably goes without saying with a group like this, but I think it's also really important for our communities and the stakeholders involved to understand that there are kind of limits to all those mitigation activities, and that it really takes kind of a lot of entities kind of taking responsibility for managing risk in the ways that they can, like home hardening, defensible space, evacuation preparedness, getting your insurance documents ready and updating all those things. Because I think, as we've seen with a lot of the fire events, there's so many other things that come into play that needs to be addressed in the face of addressing fire risk.
And it's okay. I just wanted to say something as well. I just wanted to thank everyone who contributed to this effort. This has been a long time coming. I think I lost track of exactly how long it's been, but certainly more than 12 months, probably more like 18. Scott, Allie, and Jackie in particular have put a lot of work into this. And it's really cool to see this evolve. And it's been really cool to see here on this presentation examples of folks of how they're using this, how it's informing that local collaborative interagency planning efforts on specific landscapes. So I just wanted to thank everyone at CFRI and all the cooperators up and down the Front Range who've engaged with this effort.
And just one note I put in the chat here, but just in case you didn't see that, I will post the recording of this to NoCoFireshed.org, and that'll be on our blog and also in the video section of that website. And then I will email a recording out to you all as well with slides. And please share this with people in your agencies, organizations that you think might benefit from this presentation. And thank you all for being here.
Really good stuff, guys. Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Thanks. Cool. Yeah, unless anyone has any last thoughts.